So we've already talked about how to take a custom character or a ZBrush character over to character create, use rigging and skeletons to pose our character, and then send them back to ZBrush with those poses. And in fact, from the previous video, you can see we do have a few poses in here that we can switch between using our ZBrush Pose Tools plugin. And if you want to know how to install this, go to the very first video in this series and you'll see how to install this plugin. So we can switch between these poses, and how it's doing that is if we go down, here's our subtool menu. So here's our tool menu, here's our subtool menu with all our subtools, and every one of these subtools has an associated layer with it. So if we go to Tools Layer Palette, you're going to see we have two poses or two layers in here. They're named CC Pose underscore the name of the pose here that we've changed. And the eyeball is turned on for Pose Saloon. That's because Pose Saloon is selected. If I go over here and turn on Twist, it's going to go through all the subtools and turn on the twist layer. And we've already talked about if you want to edit this pose, all you got to do is select the pose, go down here to Edit Current Pose. That's going to turn on this record button for all of the layers. So when I Alt tap through to select different subtools, it's going to have CC Pose Twist, because that's the pose we had selected when we went into edit mode. Record is turned on, so I can go through and make any adjustments. For example, I can Alt tap the cloak here. I'm going to turn X symmetry off by tapping X on my keyboard. I can go through here with my move brush and just move this cloth out of the way. If I want to, I can hold down Shift, turn off Poly Paint, so it turns off Colorize, I should say. Shift, turning this on, turns them all on. Shift, turning the colorize off, turns it all off. You can go through here and you can change out your material to say matte cap gray, and you can go through here and very quickly make minor adjustments, or like we talked about before, going through here and sculpting in any wrinkle details with your wrinkle brushes, or using dynamic simulation in ZBrush, whatever changes you want to do to any of your subtools, again, because recording mode is turned on. Once you're done editing that pose, I guess we can go ahead and turn on our colorize back on. So hold down Shift, turn colorize back on. We'll swap back to Skin Shader 4, let's say, and we'll say Save Current Record. That'll go through and turn record off for all those layers that we were just on. So again, having record on in your layers means that you can record changes to that layer. And then if we want to go back to our default bind pose, just turn off the pose in here. Now let's say you want to do posing, but you don't want to use Character Creator, you want to use ZBrush. In my ZBrush 2023 What's New, I have a ton of videos on posing, different methods of posing, and also using a new feature called Proxy Pose. So you all have a link to these videos in the description. If you want to use Z-spheres to rig, you can, or you can use Transpose Master with Z-sphere rigging, or you can just use Transpose Master. We'll do that. We're just going to use Transpose Master. So under the Z plugin menu, we're going to scroll down to the bottom here where it says Transpose Master. We'll open that menu up, and you're going to see we have a few options. We can transpose this mesh. We can also turn on Z-sphere rig if we want to rig this up with Z-spheres and ZBrush. And a really important one is this layer option. So I'm going to hit TPose Mesh, and just like Go Zing from ZBrush to Character Creator, what TPose Mesh does is merge all of your objects together into one object here at the lowest subdivision level you had available in your subdivision history. This will allow us to pose, fewer polygons, just to make it a little bit easier to make nice soft selections through here. So if I hold down Control, go in here to Mask Lasso. Like if I want to bend him at the hips, I can just say Control Alt to unmask everything from the waist up. Control Tap if I want to blur that mask out a little bit. Hit W. I'm going to hold down Alt and drag and Shift just to kind of set the gizmo pivot in the middle. Hold down Alt and move it into place. Holding down Alt with gizmo unlocks this, by the way. And then we can go through here and we can do, more drastic poses while moving all of my subtools. As opposed to another option is you could have your whole subtool stack selected, and then you can use Move Multiple with masking across multiple subtools. This just makes that process a little bit easier in ZBrush. Now in this instance, if I want to move his arm up, his cloth cloak is going to get in the way. I could go through here and go into my Move Brush, and then underneath Brush Settings here, I can go in here to Auto Masking, turn on Topological, and then whatever I select first will just move that object. So I could like sculpt this up and then move his arm up. But what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Control Shift and tap the cloak, Control Shift drag to invert that visibility. And I'm just going to raise his arm up, and I'm going to simulate in ZBrush that cloth instead. So again, If I go through here and make a mask selection, and then Control Tap in my document, I can invert that mask. Also, you have underneath geometry, or underneath your tool menu, I should say, there's a masking option. This is where you can clear or blur or invert your masks. I'm just going to Control click on my object. And if you want to know, these are very basic kind of functionality in ZBrush, masking and sculpting and stuff like that. If you go to my YouTube channel, there's an Intro to ZBrush series. This will take you through all the basics of what we've been covering in this series. Poly painting, selecting things with ZModeler, posing stuff, all of that is in this series there. So if you want to catch up on the basics of ZBrush, that's a good place for you to start. Let's do another mask here. Invert that mask. So we can rotate his arm up. I'm going to grab a little more of his clavicle here, invert this, Control Tap to blur that mask, and again set my pivot here. If we want to, we can use our smooth brush. Just hold down Shift to smooth, and then use our move brush. Another method you could use, so we're using our gizmo now. If you hit Y on your keyboard or go up here and just toggle this button off, that puts you in transpose mode. This is a mode where you can click and drag on your object and it will set like an anchor and an endpoint, and you can grab these outer rings and position this kind of like a temporary bone in your object. Then you need to make sure you hit R if you want to rotate. You can rotate this up, or you can rotate down the axis by selecting here. Again, we can hop out of there, unmask, hold down Shift to smooth, hold down Control Shift and tap to select individual pieces of your object. In fact, I can Control Tap in here to mask, Control Shift Tap to bring everything else back, Control Tap to invert that, or invert that mask, and then move this out. And again, I can do that with the cloak too. Control Shift Tap, Control Shift drag. In fact, I could have gone into Transpose Master without the cloak and avoided having it in my scene at all, but it's okay. I can just temporarily get rid of it. So we'll have his arm up, and we'll go ahead and bend his arm here. We can even go in here and give him a little bit of an expression if we want. And if we're ready to send this back over, let's go back to Transpose Master. I'm going to send this back, but make sure you turn on this layer button. So we're going to hit this T-pose to sub T with layer turned on. That's going to move, just like when we sent over to Character Creator, it's going to move our low-res verts, update our subtools that have subdivision history. So again, if we go in here to Geometry, and then Alt-tap the body here, here's Subdivision Level 1, Subdivision Level 2, so we didn't lose any of our detail levels. And if I go down here to my layers menu, you're going to see we have a new untitled layer. Now, this untitled layer isn't associated with my ZBrush pose tools. You're going to see in here there's no extra layer I can touch. Now I can go through here and I can turn on twist or turn on saloon, but this untitled layer isn't going to show up. So in order to get that to show up, all we have to do is say convert layers to pose. Now you can do that for all of your layers or hidden layers. We're just going to do it for all, so we're going to convert layers to pose. That's going to look through all of your layers and go, hey, this one down here doesn't have CC pose in front of it. We're going to append the CC pose prefix to that layer, and that'll allow us to add in our pose tools that untitled layer. So now I can switch between twist, saloon, these are the poses we brought back from Character Creator with our claw simulation, and now we have an untitled layer. This is the one we did in Transpose Master. So with that selected, let's go down here to rename, call it wave. So now our Transpose Master layers for all of our subtools are associated with pose tools now, again by appending that CC pose prefix to our layer. Now for this cloth, I'm going to alt tap the cloth cloak here, and it's going to tell you, hey, this isn't a layer, I won't allow you to move this. So to edit this pose, again, we're going to go in here to wave, we're going to say edit current pose. This will turn on record for all of my subtools in this pose. I'm going to alt tap this subtool here, we're going to move this into place. I'm going to raise this geometry up above, and in fact, if I want to, I can go down, because I have subdivision history, I'm going to go down to subdivision level 1. We're going to raise this cloth up above him. I'm going to go into solo mode, turn on polyframe here, and kind of just like we did with our weight map, I'm actually going to go through here with our ZModeler brush, hit BZM on your keyboard. hover over an edge, hold down spacebar. We're going to say mask edge loop complete. We're going to mask this edge loop, and we can continue to, I'm going to mask down one more. You can also go down to your masking menu, and you can say grow mask if you want to just kind of mask those points. Now the reason I'm doing this is I want these points to kind of stay put, and then I want to simulate the rest of the points on the cloak in ZBrush. How I can do that is go in here to my dynamics menu. I'm going to drag this over to the left. And one more time, if you want to know all about how dynamics work in ZBrush, my ZBrush 2021 playlist, ZBrush 2021 What's New, has a ton of dynamic videos in here that'll take you through the basics. But for now, all we need to know is underneath dynamics, we're going to turn on collision volume. That'll make everything that's not the selected subtool. So in other words, all the subtools visible except for the cloak subtool that I have selected are going to be a collision volume. I'm going to turn the inflate down a little bit. That's going to basically inflate out from our collision volume to stop it from penetrating through the collision volume. We have gravity turned on, which is what we want. We just want this cloth to settle on our collision volume, or on the body of Aang, I should say. If you want, you can turn on self-collision, and firmness is how firm the relationships are going to hold up for the cloth simulation between the verts on his cloak here. I'm going to go ahead and leave it at the defaults. We're going to go say gravity. I'm going to turn this down quite a bit. I don't need it to run that fast. We're going to hit run simulation. That'll go ahead and drape this cloth cloak onto his body here. Once I'm done, I can control drag to unmask. I can go through here. I can smooth out anything that I want to smooth, go through and move anything for the subtool. Again, because we're in edit subtool mode for our layer, it's allowing us to change the vert positions at any subdivision level that we want. If we want to start sculpting more wrinkles, we can go up to subdivision level 2. We can go through here. We can add our own custom wrinkles along here. And like I mentioned before, in ZBrush, we can switch to any brush. For example, the pinch brush. I can go down here to my brush menu. We can go into elasticity, crank up our simulation iterations, and then we can use our pinch brush and simulate at the same time. You're going to see it kind of did a weird thing where it snapped my collision volume. We don't really need that collision volume anymore, so underneath dynamics, I'm going to go ahead and turn that off while we're sculpting, and that way I can sculpt without it snapping to our collision volume. Now you can see I'm going through and sculpting, but I don't have quite enough geometry to get the detail that I want while I'm sculpting on this cloth. Now, I can't just go over here and hit the divide button. It's going to tell me while we're in record mode, we can't subdivide this mesh. So we'll go back up here to our pose tools here. We're going to hit save our current record. So any changes that we've made in that layer for that subtool in that pose, it'll go ahead and save. I'm going to click out of wave to go back to our default here. And now, with the cloth object selected, I can hit divide and add a subdivision. Go back into wave. Edit current pose. And you see when I select the cloth, I now have one more subdivision for that object. Let's go ahead and save. We'll go out of wave to go back to our default. And another option for you is right here underneath the pose tools, you also have a divide all button down here. So if you've posed out some low res meshes and there's not enough geometry definition in order to do your details, you can go down here and divide all. It will add a subdivision to every single object in your scene. Also, just above that, you have a lower res and a higher res. So we've already talked about all low and all high. You can say all low, and that'll drop down all of your subtools down to the lowest subdivision. Same thing with all high. And you can also do that step by step. So if you want to go down one subdivision level for all your subtools, just hit lower res. And if you want to go up one subdivision, obviously, you can say higher res. Also, right next here to divide all, you have a smooth modifier and smooth UV and re-UV. That's the exact same things you'll find right over here. And if you ever want to know what these buttons do in ZBrush, you can hover over them and then hold down the control key. And that'll bring up a little floating help menu. Really all this SMT does is turn on a smooth modifier, so when you divide, it averages your vertices, giving you a smooth look. Now, if we want to get rid of a pose, there's a few different ways we can do that. You can go ahead down here to delete all, and what that's going to do is delete all the poses out of pose tools, which means if we go into our layers here, it's going to delete all of our layers, which in turn will delete all of our poses out of pose tool. However, you're going to see there's some other options here underneath rename, there's remove. So if we choose one, let's say choose wave. If I go through here and delete, it's going to delete my wave layer. If I go in here to delete other, it's going to delete all of my poses except for wave. And if I go in here to delete all, it's going to delete everything, all the layers out of my scene. However, I don't have to necessarily delete it. I can just remove it from the pose tools stack by going down here and saying remove. So with wave selected and I go in here and remove, it's going to go and remove that CC pose prefix. So it'll keep my layer available to me in ZBrush. If I scroll up, you're going to see we still have the wave layer in all of our subtools here. It's just not going to show up in here because it removed the prefix. However, if I want to remove wave completely from ZBrush, let's go ahead and say convert layers to pose. That'll convert my wave layer back into a pose tools layer that I can activate. And now with wave selected, I can hit delete. And again, that's going to remove it from pose tools because it completely deleted that layer off of all of my subtools. Now, speaking of layers that aren't associated with pose tools, you can, for example, I'm going to alt tap the cloak here. If I go in here to say surface noise and turn this on, we'll go ahead and zoom in here. I'm going to turn on UV because our cloth cloak has UVs. I'm going to go in here to noise plug. I'm going to choose weave. Say OK. I'm going to say mix basic noise down to 0, color blend down to 0. I'm going to say plugin scale. I'm going to scale that up a little bit. I'm also going to turn that strength down. So if I zoom in, you can see I've got a weave going. Let's actually go to the right here. So here's my weave noise. So I can turn that weave noise down just a little bit. And if I hit OK, you're going to see this object or the subtool in my stack has surface noise turned on. Now this is just a displacement map. So I can toggle that on and off. It's not really doing anything to the geometry. So of course, if I want to go through here and turn on twist, for example, that surface noise is just going to be turned on for that subtool. And at any point, I can alt tap that subtool and just turn noise on and off. However, if I go out of twist, if we want to apply this noise to actually displace our geometry and not just be a toggle that we turn on and off, I'm going to go up here to geometry. I'm going to hit divide a couple more times to get plenty of geometry for my object. I'm going to go down here to surface noise. I'm going to hit apply to mesh. Now, instead of having a noise that I turn on and off, that weave has been baked into my high-res geometry. Now, of course, we're up to 600,000 polygons for that cloak, so you got to get pretty high-res to apply that. However, maybe this is just a detail that I want to toggle on and off as a layer. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's hit Control Z to undo. So we're back here where we're able to toggle our noise on and off. Instead of applying it to our mesh now, let's go to our layer menu. And with the cloak selected, let's say add a new layer. We're going to go ahead and rename it Weave. It already has record turned on. So now that it's recording, if I go down here and say apply to mesh, now it's going to apply that displaced geometry as a layer. So let's go ahead and turn off record by tapping record. And now you can see I can go through here and I can turn the strength of that weave down. I can actually go down to the negatives and invert it. And in fact, down here, I can overcrank it. So here it is inverted, and then here it is popping out. And then again, I can just overcrank that on the fly. Or if I go up here and turn it on, I can just use this eyeball to turn this on and off. Now, I'm not going to associate this with the character creator pose tools. It's only applied to this one subtool. It's not applied to all of my subtools. So what I can do is I can have this layer, again, I can just toggle this layer on and off with the eyeball. I can switch over to any pose in my stack here. So we'll go to the saloon pose and then alt tap the cloak here. And then I can just turn my weave on. So those details, any details you apply to a layer will just follow along. All you have to do is just go in and toggle on or off any layers for any subtool that you want that aren't necessarily associated with the pose tools over here. We'll go ahead and go out of saloon, go back to our base pose. And I think that's everything about pose tools. And again, if you're just joining us and you don't know what I'm talking about when I'm referring to character creator and posing, go watch the previous videos in the series that'll walk you through all of that. I just wanted a standalone video going over basic character pose tools functionality. Speaking of, if I click this little top button here, it'll take you to a little splash screen where you can say watch tutorial. and that'll link you to a bunch of tutorials from a website here, as well as you can say learn more, and that'll bring up a website with more information on pose tools specifically. So in conclusion, as you could tell from the Transpose Master segment, it's a lot easier to pose things in Character Creator. Instead of masking and visibility selections, you can give your character bones with an IK/FK control rig. And while you can use Z-spheres to create a hierarchy of influences to move those verts around, you don't really have control over weight distribution, and you can't just apply poses or scrub through an animation to get that pose, then simply adjust the pose on the fly, again using that edit pose functionality. So there's really no comparison between the ease of use that Character Creator and Pose Tools brings in regards to functionality, speed, ease of use, organization, and we've only just started scratching the surface of what Character Creator can do. So I'm going to keep digging in deeper, and of course we'll still have fun creating as we go.